And this is a hook that we use to handle requests or events that are happening outside the React component. And a quick definition of how, or a quick scenario of how useEffect operates. So something like fetching data in a server or an API. You want to fetch that data over the internet. So this like it's a stuff that is happening in a outside what React. And thanks to React community, they developed this hook to help us fetch data from where? From somewhere like outside the React component. And things like you are doing a post request, like sending a login or registering in a system. So that action or that event, it's not a React event. It's just an effect that is happening outside where the server is being hosted. Like now that server is or the action of registering. You are registering a server that is hosted somewhere and you are sending that data over the internet. So what happens? So if that side effect can't be done, event handler, what you do, you call the use effect hook. Once you call that use effect hook, you implement or you do your setup on that use effect, whether you are fetching data, maybe whether you are posting data in an API or you are reading or you are updating, whatever you want to do. Then once that is done, you can do something with that data in a React component. So when that data is being fetched, it's now when that component loads and you can use that data to do something with it. How do we work or how do we implement the use effect hook? So it's just lets you synchronize a component with an external system, which is the data. So the use effect hook, it has two parts, which is the setup and the dependencies. So the setup is what you have talked about, what you want to do. Thing like you want to fetch data in an API, or you want to send a login request with your data, something like this. You are registering, you want to send an email and a password. Once you do the setup, the next thing is dependencies. So the dependencies are in array format that guide or make sure your use effects runs only when it's required, not to just keep on running every time, but especially it runs when you have now a change in that variable you are using. If you are fetching data users, so the dependencies for that use effect should be users to make sure it only fetches or runs that use effect again when the component or we have the change in the user's data. So the basic syntax, this is what we do. We have a callback function where you do the asynchronous actions, things like fetching data, things like creating an account, which is like a post request, which is happening in a server. And we also have now an anonymous function. So the anonymous function is just a cleanup function that helps you to make sure the use effects runs effectively. Then we have a dependency array. So the dependency array, it controls how your use effect runs. So the use effects runs once whenever the component is rendering. Then until now, any other dependency changes. That is when the use effect will run again. So you should know and make sure you pass the right dependencies array here of whatever you want the use effect to run whenever you have a change. Things like I've said, we have users. So for the first time loading that project, the use effect will run. But if you want a subsequent run on all use effect, you want to pass those users data there. And if you have a change, like if you have a new user being posted in the database, so you use that to rerun that use effect and fetch the new data with the new user. So it was one of the most simple use effects or hook in React. And let's see how we can implement and use it in our React application. So I just open my folders here and create a new project, which is use effect. So the use effects, I want to open it with VS Code. Once I open with VS Code, I can scaffold the React template using the PNPM create vite. The name should be that use effect, then the package name, and then should be a React of TypeScript and install the dependencies. So on the app.tsx, that is our start point where we start coding. So I want to remove everything here. I want just to remain with this useState hook. So the use effects work hand in hand with other hooks to manage the state and also to manage the external state effects that are happening in your application. So I will import the two hook, the use state and now the use effect. So the use effect, which is this one, the use effects. They are all coming from the React library. So what I want to do, we have been working with the jokes, and you might be wondering where I've been getting those jokes from. So we have an API that is free that gives you these jokes, and you visit that joke API, you get those jokes. So the endpoint for that, where that jokes are being deployed, is on this site. So let me just paste it here. So this site we call official-joke-api.appspot. So it's just an official maybe API for jokes. And if you type the default routes, it gives you something to do like try this, try this, try this. So if you check on that, it's telling me like to try either random jokes slash random 10, random slash random, then jokes slash 10, then jokes slash random. So if I try our server name, which is this slash this random joke, the one it's telling me here to try out. So if I try out this, I should get a random joke, which is of a JSON. So I'll be getting this JSON joke. We have the type is a general, the setup is now the joke, the punchline, and the ID. If I go back, if I try to fetch this random 10, so this endpoint, it's having like it's fetching 10 random jokes at once. So if I run that and I beautify this, I'm getting what? 10 jokes because of this endpoint, which is slash random 10. If I try maybe this, I should work the same. If I paste it there. So game case is returning out these jokes. So it's just an API hosted somewhere and it's free to use in your application. So I'll be using this And I especially will be using the first route, which is random joke, just generate one joke in our application. So I'll be using this and have this joke. Each time I refresh, I'm getting a new joke. If I refresh, I'm getting a new joke because you are randomly requesting, like we are sending a get request to this API and getting each joke with a different ID and with a different joke. So let me do this now in our application. What we want to do, we want to use this use effect in our application to fetch that data and map it in our what? In our React component, this one. How can we do that? So in our application, we want to define two things. First of all is an interface. So the interface will be the one we will be using. So let me just turn off this. So the interface, we are fetching jokes. And if you check well, this joke has an interface of what? Like the columns, the type, setup, punchline, and what? ID. So that is what I want to have in my interface. So joke should have the ID of type what? Number. Then we have the joke. Do we have, it's a joke? No, we have the setup, the punchline, and what? The type. So we have the setup, which is now the joke. Should be this setup. Then it's a string. The next thing is what? A punch. A punchline. A punchline is also a what? A string. What else do we have in that joke we are getting? A type. Yes. You want to make sure whenever you are fetching this data, this is our guard. Like we are only making sure we are fetching or we are passing a joke of this interface, which is a ID, setup, punchline, and what? So this should be punchline that way. So whenever I have that now, I can use the useState to initialize our data. So if I come here in my application or the function, I can first of all have my useState to initialize our value. So when running this in the first time, we do not have any what? Joke to display. So the initial value should be what? Null. So what can I do? So const joke. So joke, then set joke. So this joke should be, I used it hook, then the hook should have an initial value of what? Null, because for the first time we haven't fetched any joke, right? So the initial value should be null. So the typing for this should be a union type, either this joke interface or what? Or what? What should we have here? We are fetching the joke, then you are using the union type to display the joke or what? This null, because that is the initial value we have whenever we are running this component, because the first time we haven't fetched that joke. So what should we be having in this joke? We should be having null. Once we fetch joke and we use the set joke function to update our joke with the joke that we are fetching, that is when now the joke will change from null to the joke we are fetching. Are we getting? Then maybe we can have another use state for loading. So let me just have another use state. for loading, then set loading. So loading should be a useState of a Boolean, which is initially should be false. Then later on, we'll use it somewhere to do that. So let me remove this count. You're not using count now. So the first thing is now to display our div here. So we can have a div. So this div can display the joke up. So we can have an ender of h3. So this can be maybe use effect for this. Let me have this use effect joke up. And another maybe sub title, a p tag, maybe fresh joke every fetch. Once that we have that, that is our maybe the title of our application you are trying to build, which is now use effect joke up. Then we can have a joke card that has now the joke itself. So on this joke, you want to do something. Remember, we have issues of what? Returning a what? One parent. So that should be dissolved with this empty fragment. So let me do this way. So we can have these styles for this handler. We have it that way. Then if we try to run this, I think it's running on port 5173. Let's confirm whether it's running on port 5173. Yeah, so our app is running on this. Then whatever you are doing is this, minimize this, and we can continue from there. So on this div, I want to display the jokes or the joke that we are fetching on this endpoint or the server we are having. But before displaying that joke, remember that joke for the first time is null. You want to give the user the loading state of what? Waiting for that joke to be fetched. So that is why I define this loading use state so that we can be able to use it somewhere. And instead of just now displaying the joke or something else, we can use now the ternary operator to do that. So we open the JSX here. Once we open, we can use this joke or the loading state. So we can use the loading states. So if it's loading, I remember we have the question mark to check if it's loading, which is now the if statement, the way we write, we want to display something. So if it's loading, what should we display? A message like what? Loading a what? Fresh what? Yes. So I can have that div maybe displaying that. So a div saying we can have this the emoji of showing loading. Where is it? What do we call that emoji? Let me just copy it from somewhere. So we are having this text or the emoji of just showing loading and maybe a p tag. So the p tag can be loading what? A fresh joke. So that is what we want to do. Remember, we have to resolve the issue of having two components being redundant. So we need to wrap them with a div now, just to avoid those issues, which is now here we do that. Then remember, that is the first case scenario when loading is what? True. So if we show here if it's loading is true, we want to show that in our page, but we haven't done that because we have not tackled the else part of our what? Of our if statement. So the second part, it's now we can check whether we have a joke. So this, remember, joke, it has a null or what? Joke. So if we have null, that means we do not have what? If we have joke as null, remember it's a union. So it can be a joke or what? Null. So this null is set when maybe we are yet to fetch that data from where? From our API. So how can we do that? So we can have another quotation here to check, which is this now joke we are having here, because it's it has two parts. It can be null, it can be what? That joke. So we can use now the same statement, like the joke itself. Then we check again. So do we have a joke? We display what? That joke. We can have that. If we do not have a joke, maybe it's null. We can have something else to display to say like maybe we have a server error. Maybe the data is yet to be what? To be fetched. That is what we are doing here. So we are saying if we have a joke, do this. If we do not have a joke, do this. So if you have a joke, what should we display? The actual joke now. Are you together? Hello? Evans, are we together? Okay. So if you have a joke, you want to display what? That joke here. So let's do that as quick as possible. So we want to have a div. So that div, maybe you want to display something inside there, another div to display this emoji there. I said I'm a fan of these emojis to make my components maybe. Then we have a p tag. So the p tag is where now we want to display that joke. So remember this joke is an object, the one we are typing with this. So we can display the ID, the setup, the punchline, and what? The type. So in this joke now, we want to display, first of all, the setup. So we do the setup. So it should be joke dot what? The setup. That is what we want to display first. Then after that, we want to have another p tag below to display what? The punchline of that joke. We call the joke dot what? The punchline. So what else should we display in that? So I think that is those are the two things we want to display, the setup and the what? The punchline, which are the important things we want to display on that joke. Once that is done, maybe we can have some style to style the p tag, this one. And maybe also styling the next p tag this way. We want them to have those styling there. And the next thing is now to implement the other part of joke. So this is when we have a joke. What if we do not have a joke? What should we do? Maybe you can say failed to do what? To fetch. So we can have a div there. So this div, remember now, we want to get this now. It's loading state because our loading state is what? True. That is what is happening here. So if loading is equals to true, do what? This. If loading is false, we want to do what? Another thing. We check the joke. So we are like nesting two if statements at the same time. We are first of all checking the loading. If it's loading, display this. If it's doing this, do this. So if we do not have a joke, that means we have an issue maybe with fetching that joke, and we can display something like what? What can we display? A p tag statement saying what? Maybe, oops, we failed to what? Fetch that what? Joke. Something like that. And maybe we have this icon there, which is an emoji showing failed to fetch. Then we can have some custom styling for this p tag, which is color of this, of maybe this gray. Once we have that, so we are done now implementing our joke component. The next thing is now maybe to use now the use effect to implement the fetching of our joke, just not to be having this loading. So we want maybe to style the div that is carrying everything, this one div. We want to have a style of background white, whatever you have here, the banding, the border radius, text, and margin bottom. So to have that. And then we need anything else. So the text should be maybe of color what? Dark, eh? So this loading can have a style, and this style can be color to be what? Maybe dark. So the dark, we can pass this color 33 so that we can be able to see that joking fresh joke without a dot there. That way. So we are fetching a new joke. So we want to implement now the use effect. And the way you import the use effect, we import it that way. And at the top, we just call the use effect. Then the use effect, we said it's a function that expects a callback function this way. So it's being implemented different from how other state management hook operates. So this function, then you are done with your use effects. Remember to add what? The dependencies. So array that way. So this is where we implement our function. And here, this is where we will mount the array that will be able to guide when to rerun this use effect, because this use effect is already run when the component load on the first time in the browser. So what can we do? So we can have a function outside our use effect, then call that function in the use effect, because we're saying the use effect runs once whenever the component mount. So that is what we want to do. So at the top here, I want to have a function which is a const, maybe the fetch now, the fetch function, which is now the fetch joke. This fetch joke can be a synchronous arrow function because you are fetching something from now over the internet. So the asynchronous function, we want to do something. So we want to try catch now, the try catch block. This try catch, you want to await something. So you want to await, what are we awaiting? So the node or the TypeScript, the React has this function called fetch. So the fetch is a function that helps you fetch data from a URL. So like the fetch expects what? The input or the URL where you want to fetch data from. So this is just an inbuilt library for fetching data, but we have others that helps you fetch data in a server. So we have we have this library called anxious. So anxious operate the same with fetch. So the anxious, where is it? This one from the npm. So it's just a library that helps you to fetch data from where. So it's a promise-based HTTP client for the browser and what? The Node.js. So it just helps you fetch data from where. So that is how you use it. But we don't want to use this. Let's just use the inbuilt fetch function that comes in the React library. So this fetch expects a URL. So we can pass it as a string. So that string is now the actual endpoint we want to fetch data. Where is that our endpoint? This one. So this is the endpoint that we want to be hitting or to be requesting our data from. Anytime we refresh, we are getting a new what? Joke. So I can copy this endpoint and place it here. Then we await now to fetch that data from this. Remember, this awaiting is giving an object of a what? A joke. So we can store it somewhere in a variable like what? Response. So you are waiting that, and in most cases, we say whenever you are fetching data from outside uh, or anywhere in an API, you want to convert that data into a JSON, even though we know it's coming as a JSON. So what can we do? So we can also have another variable const data, which also you are awaiting. So we are awaiting the response dot JSON. So we are just formatting whatever we are getting from this URL. So we are formatting that, then we can test this by console logging that data and check whether we have issues. So of course we need some catch block to console log some issues if we fail to fetch that joke. So console.error, then the message can be error fetching what? A joke. Then we pass the actual error there so that you can be able to see. Then the try catch block has a finally block, which is finally. So this finally block, we want to do something. So when we are fetching, we want to set the loading to be true. Remember, we set it false here. So we need to make sure this should be at initial should be false. But when this function is running, that is when we want to update what? Is state from false to what? To true. Where can we do that? So we can just have it here by just calling now the setter function of this useState. So I just call the set loading and change it from false to what? To true, to await whatever we are doing here. Then when after doing this, after everything has happened in the finally block, we want to set back our loading state to be what? False. So I call the set loading to be what? False. So that is what I want to be doing. Whenever this function is being called, we want to update our state, this loading to be true. So whenever we have the loading value where you're displaying that, so it will be now be changing from true to false, and it will be displaying this component or rendering this depending on what is changing. So if loading is true, it will be displaying this. If we set back to false, it should now run the other part. But on the other part, we are checking another thing, which is joke. So if joke is equals, you have a joke, we want to display that joke. If joke is something else other than a joke, which we are fetching, which can be now null. We want to display something else. That is what is happening. So after that, this function is now, we can call it in our use effect here. So that is where we want to invoke our function, because the use effect runs automatically when the component mount. So we can now call the fetch joke function there and do that. So whenever now we run this application, so let's go back to where this is running. And for the first time, we are getting some issues with the internet. If I reload this, you see now whenever this is running, we're having some issues because we are yet to set our joke with a new what. We haven't used this function to update our joke with what? The one we are fetching from this. We are just console logging that data. So if I come back here, inspect, come to the joke or the console log, I will run this, we are getting out the console log, the message that we have formatted that has what? Now the data from our bucket or from the API you have here. So this is what we are getting from there. So if we come back here, we have to this, and you may be asking yourself, why are you having two console log, whereas we have only one? You can know why. We have two console log messages in our console log, but we have only one console log. Who can tell us? Joshua. Joshua, you with us?
Yes.
Do you know why we have the two console log, but in our code, we only have one console log message? Do you know why? Anyone who has an idea?
Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah. Because of the strict mode.
the strict mode. That's one,
Yes.
that is one response. Another response? Yeah, that can be the answer to that, but from what we defined React, it uses two what? We have the virtual DOM and the what? The real DOM. And virtual DOM is just a copy of the real what? So whatever we have in the virtual DOM is in the what? In the real DOM. So the two responses, they are like a purity function that checks whether the virtual DOM and the real DOM are the same. That is what is happening like now behind the scene. Like the virtual DOM is, we are displaying the data from the actual DOM, but virtual DOM in the behind the scene is checking with the defining algorithm, checking whether we have the same value and displaying them. So it's just it's not an error that comes with the React, but it's just the two uh, virtual DOM working hand in hand to mirror that response and update it. So whenever now we get the two actual data, the virtual DOM or the React that knows that now the two components are giving the same what responses. So it's not an error, and it only happens on development. When you go to production, we'll be only having one response, which is now the actual DOM data. But here, the virtual DOM is now working hand in hand with the real DOM to check for purity purposes, like to make sure we are getting the same data at the same time. So we have that data, and we see it's an object now, which has an ID, punchline, setup, and type. So once we console log this data now, we are sure now this data, it's what we want. So we can comment this and now call our setter function in our useState to update our state, which is now the joke with the data that is coming from our what? The endpoint. So how can we do that? So we call what? The set what? Joke function, and we pass what? That data. So the joke now will be passed with this now, the joke we are getting from where? We'll be getting this data and updating our joke with this what? So if we now reload this page, we are getting some data now, and I remember the purity purpose is like we are getting like two responses or the console log, but for this we are getting this. So we are getting this data because we are reloading the page, and whenever we reload the page, the use effect is running. That use effect, when it's running, it's invoking our function, which is the fetch what? Joke. Once we fetch that joke, so we are setting the loading state to be what? True. That means now the first part is the one being displayed when we reload this page, that one. If we now update our state, which is the joke, using the set joke function, we pass it the data that we are getting from where? From our API, which is this API where we are getting that data. We update the joke with this, and we set the loading to be false, so that now we shift from the first block to the second block of the if statement. In the if statement, we have nested another if statement. So we are checking now the joke. So is joke having a data? Yes, display that what? Data. If joke is equals to null, display what? Maybe this can be something to do with the internet issue, or maybe when you turn off this server, if I turn it off and refresh this, let's try and see. We can't get that, but I will show you how we can get this message being displayed. So
You
with
can
that,
corrupt the link. You can
yes.
corrupt the link. You can corrupt the link.
Oh, okay. So let me run the project. So I can just type maybe something which is not the official link there. And if we run that, we are getting now the path for what? This one. Where we are having some issues with failed to fetch what? Data, because this endpoint is not valid because of this data we have added here. So it's just checking. Is it loading? Yes. Give us that loading state. Are we fetch that data? No. So that joke is equals to what? To null. We display what? The else part, which is now this. But if we have the actual endpoint and we refresh this, we'll get this. But we want to do something now with this. You don't want to keep on refreshing here. You want to have a button here that we can hit that endpoint and refresh that and get what? A new joke. So how can we do that? So just below our application or the component, maybe here, we can have a div. So this div can have this button to be refreshing our data. So on this button, we can have maybe some styling there of this div to be to align everything at the center. Then the button maybe to have this some styling. So the button is this one. Then the text of that button should be what? Get a what? A new what? Joke. So we can do something like that. So on button, which event should we listen to? Which event? Which event? On what? So on click. So when on click, what should we pass here now? So we have a function that is fetching data, right? And this use effect is just runs one when we mount our component. So what should we pass in this button, which is on click? We can pass what? This function again, because this function is only called once here. So we can call it again with our custom button. So we copy this and we pass it here. So with that now we have our what? Our button. So this button, whenever we click it, we are actually calling this function for doing what? Fetching that data. So if I click this, I'm getting what? A loading state and a new joke is being displayed. If I click again, I'm getting the loading state and doing what? Because the function has a loading state that is changing this, like it's dynamically shifting between the three if statements. If loading is true, we want to do this. And that state is being updated by this set loading through here. If we fetch and set data and we do not have any error, we want now to set back the setting load to be what? False. Then the else part operates here or kicks in. So we can do that, we do that. We get a new joke, we get a new joke there. A new joke, loading, a new joke. Loading, a new joke. So the button, remember when fetching, we can somehow dynamically change this data from get a joke, maybe also loading in this button. Remember this ternary operator is very powerful on React. So what can we do on this button? So it just instead of displaying a text, just a static text, we can pass a JSX in that button. Then we use a codation. Remember the ternary operator, expect a codation and the two parts you want to be displaying. So what codation we do want to check? The loading what? State, the one we have here. So the loading state, we want to do this. If loading is true, that means we are doing what? Fetching what? A new what? Hello? So if loading is true, that means what are we doing? We are fetching a new joke. So what can we display here? Fetching, right? Or loading. That is what we should display there because the loading is what cost what? So we can have that text loading. If loading is false, what should we display? Get a what? A new joke. So we can have it now, our text there, get a new joke. So this button is now dynamically being updated according to this what? Loading joke. So if I click this now, you'll be seeing that loading text in the button when loading is true. So that is what is happening here. I can have some icons just to give you the difference. So we can have the loading and get joke. If we do this now on a bigger screen and we try to fetch now a joke. So get a new joke, you see that button is changing from getting a new joke to loading. Once we get that joke, we do out, get back to that. So are we getting something up that point? Any question? So we are doing this, we are having that loading state both on the component and also on the button. Then if we do have that joke, we update in our what? In our component and we get that button. So this is what happens when registering in our system. When you click that registering button, you see changing it from register to registering or creating an account. That is what that thing happens behind the scene. So that button is dynamically rendered, the text. It has a loading state that checks if it's loading, it should now be maybe registering here. If you are doing a registering, something like that. If you haven't clicked that button, it should just be what? Register. So that is what we'll be doing when doing now that web application. Are you together? Any question? So I want you to check something. So this is an request you are making, and the browser is very powerful. It has a lot of features when it comes to development journey. And if you are a developer, you should be aware of the component that we have in the browser. So if you inspect, you should be able to see a lot of tabs here. We have the element that's just displaying whatever we have. We have the console where we see the JavaScript running or the TypeScript. Remember, the JavaScript runs behind the scene, so we cannot see it in the what? In the browser. But in the console, that is where we see what? Then if we go to this network tab, so the network tab is now responsible for tracking your network traffic. Whenever you are making a request, getting that request, posting that request, everything will be displayed where? Here. Then we will click this plus button. We have another tools like application, we have memory, we have performance. But in most cases, we'll be working hand in hand with the console to see whatever our TypeScript is console logging, and the network tab, and the what? The application. So the application, remember I said we'll be working with local storage to store our token when we'll be logging. We'll be using this local storage we have here, which stores data in a key value format, which is an object. So we'll be seeing like somewhere here, maybe the user, the object of that user, then the token on this side. That is what we'll be storing here. So if you're working with cookies, we have part for storing cookies for your application. So, but for us, we'll be working with local storage. So the part I want you to focus on is now the network tab. So the network tab is now responsible when you are working with two different ports. We have port 5173, which is our front end, and we have now the port that is in this official endpoint we are working with, which is a deployed URL. So this is a domain name, but somewhere it has a port that is mapping to what? To this endpoint. So whenever I click this, when I'm in network tab, I'm getting that request. So if you check here, I have this request. This request is this, the one we are getting after the domain. So the domain name is this. So the request is random slash what? If I do a different like which do we have here? So if I do this, the other one, this one, the jokes random. So the path will be that slash what? Slash jokes slash what? Random. So that is what we'll be seeing here. So this request is a network request, and it has a lot of information you can get from when, especially when you are working with front-end and back-end. If you click this random joke, it will give you now the information, what is happening behind the scene. What is it happening? So you are making a request to where? To this what? Endpoint. Are you seeing that? We are making a request of this what? Which request method? Remember from our bucket, we have how many request method? Get, put, post, and what? And delete. So which method are we doing? Get. Which is the status code? 200. So remember, these are domain name. but the actual remote address is what? The IP address of that API where it's hosted. It is this IP address or the local host where it's running from. But remember, it's not a local, it's somewhere in the cloud, which has this IP address and the port what? 443. Then we have something with the rest is just information and the request ender. So if we might be having a token to request this endpoint, if this endpoint was protected in our header, we should be adding a what? Authorization what? Ender. So that is why you'll be seeing a token somewhere here in this header response. So that is why you'll be sending those actually, yeah, the request header. So we'll be having the token under this part. If we have a token, we are passing this endpoint. Then the preview is what you expect from what? From this endpoint, this preview. Then the response is now the actual data that you are getting from where? From this endpoint. So this response is whatever we have here, if you can confirm. It's what did the fish say when it eats the wall? Damn. So that is what we have here. Then the initiator is just where the request is coming from. Remember, we are working in a app.tsx what? File. So that is where this data is coming, or the request, or the initiator. Then the timing is now the request response cycle. When it's happening now, how many millisecond happens to do that? So probably it took like how many second? 615 millisecond to fetch that data from where? Our API. But the most important thing is the response and the ender. So that the two things will be working hand in hand to get that. So anytime I make a request, that request is recorded here, the path that you are requesting from. So if I click this, the ender will be the same, but the response will be having now a different thing, whatever you have where? Here. If I click again, I'll get another request. So this request, the header is the same. The preview is whatever we expect from what? The response. The preview is guided by the interface that we usually have in our front end. The interface we have here, like this interface, like this joke. So this is what is guiding this preview. Then the response is now the actual data that is coming from this endpoint. So if you are from a locals where we are doing our work, we could be having now our request URL should be what? Localhost, maybe 3000. Then slash what? Jokes. Then the request is what? Get method. 200 request if we have what? Excuse me. So if we change now let's see this. If we change this endpoint and alter that endpoint and have a different request. So if we try clear this on the network tab and make a request again, you get a what? A 404 what? Because that endpoint is not what? Valid. If we click this, we are getting now, we are requesting on this endpoint that is now we have added some letters here and make it what? An invalid URL. Then the request is the same get. So the status code, remember the status code that we were setting on the controllers when doing our API. So that is what's being displayed here. This is what we'll be having, like 404 not found. So you are checking that. The response, we are not getting response because of this. It's not a valid what? URL. But if you have the valid URL, you should be able to get your data well in the request tab. So mostly when we be having our backend and frontend connected them, you'll be working hand in hand. Even before displaying that data, you will be consolidating that data here so that you can confirm whether that data is coming, then you display in your application. If you want to check what is happening on the network tab, go to the network tab, try to make that the request. So the request will give you the enough information from what you are working. So the request path is what we are eating, the random joke that we have here, this path after the domain name or the host name. Any question? So I want to keep it as simple as that before we make it somehow complex later. But go try out this and see how you can work along. So for this assignment, I just want you, instead of now just fetching random joke, I want you to use the other path for fetching random 10 jokes and you display them in your application. So you just have a component and you render those 10 what? Joke. Anytime you click now the get new jokes, you get what? How many random jokes? 10 of them. And you display them in your what? In your application. So you're just making it as simple as possible for now, just to understand how a use effect operates.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Where can we find the endpoints? Yeah, like are these endpoints the try random joke, random 10 jokes?
Yes, these endpoints, the whatever is happening here, if you hit this official endpoint, it's telling you like this is the default route where we say like welcome to Honor, whatever we happen. But for him, it's just telling you, hey, my jokes are categorized in 4 routes. So you can hit the route for random joke to get one joke. So if you concatenate the host and that random joke, you get what? That joke there. If you do the other one, which is trash what? Random 10, you'll get what? So these are just controllers and route in that API. And so you get how many jokes? 10 of them. So it's upon you now to choose which one to use. This or this or this or this. So this is just a free API, something you can build and also deploy on internet and let people use where they were confronted. That is what happened here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.